evening, ladies and gentlemen. Is this on? No.
Talk directly.
No, it's not on. Is this on?
Yes.
That's one thing I know, is when the mic is on or not. Well, I know a few other things, but not much.
I wanted to begin talking about your childhood, actually, and your life before you rose to fame.
That was a happy time.
Can you tell us a bit about your first 17 years?
Well, I had a lovely childhood, a bit weird, you know. My parents were extremely unusual. They met during the war. My mother was working in the resistance. My grandmother was Jewish. And my mother Eva and her father, Arthur Sakamazok, I mean, there wasn't much resistance in Vienna, I can tell you. But there were these two. And they did this very, it must have been, when I try and imagine what 24-year-old Eva went through, you know, with sort of meeting strangers on the bridge at 2 o'clock in the morning to get a little piece of material on which were written the plans of the Battle of Stalingrad, or some of them, you know. That was their job, was to get information about the Russians, about the Nazis and the Russians back to the Allies. I mean, the Russians were the Allies, but, oh, I don't know, you know, it all, one minute they're your allies and the next minute they're your friends. One thing we do know, the Nazis were not our friends. My grandfather and my mother were both doing this, and it was very, very dangerous, and that must have traumatized her completely. My grandfather was very cool because he had been a colonel in the First World War, so he knew a lot about war and was very, very sort of up for this, you know. But my mother was a ballet dancer and a cabaret artiste in Weimar, Berlin. You know, she had no idea that, well, nobody had any idea that Mr. Hitler was going to walk in and change everyone's lives like that. Anyway, he did. And and she was very beautiful. There's some beautiful pictures of her in that book, taken by a man she loved very much, who she cast away because he joined the Nazi Party. Poor thing. I met him years later. He's still in love with her. He's dead now. Lothar Wibelt. He's very famous, actually. He's the guy who got the picture of Jesse Owens winning the 1934 Olympics, was it? Yeah. And Hitler's face, which is also kind of great. Anyway, he was in love with Eva, and he only joined the Nazi Party because you sort of had to, I think. You couldn't work. But of course, Eva was, you know, right up there with her ideals and her everything, rather like my father too. They were both like that, and that was it. Poor old Rubel, out on your ass. So my mother was there. She was doing her thing with her father. I mean, there's endless funny stories which nobody knows their own family stories. I don't know if you want to hear them. Do you? Yeah. They're quite good, actually. So the law came out after the Anschluss in Vienna and all over Austria that all Jews had to wear the gold star so they could be identified and done horrible things to in the street. And when my grandfather found out about this, he went crazy with rage. And he said to my mother, "Come along, we're going to the head of Gestapo now." My mother had 2 long plaits, and she was quite small. My grandfather, on the other hand, was incredibly tall and used to wear a Tyrolean cloak and a little Tyrolean hat with a feather. And he had a dachshund. And so off they went, what a troop, to the head of Gestapo. And in marched my grandfather, very grand, you know, the Baron von Sachermasoch, Colonel. And bugger me, behind the desk was a man who had been an ensign under my grandfather in the First World War. And he stood up and he said, Colonel, Colonel, Herr Baron, and how wonderful to see you. What can I do for you? My grandfather didn't crack a smile. He just said, well, for one thing, my wife is not going to wear the Star of David. Proud though she is to be too... No, I'm making that up. Anyway, she's not going to, so will you please write this on a piece of paper and give it to me now? And he, yes, of course. Practically pulling his forelock. Although I somehow imagine him as bald, don't you? Yeah. Anyway, this went on. My grandfather got the piece of paper and put it in his coat, or somewhere, whatever you do with a cloak, I don't know. And on his way out, he was sort of swishing his way out with the cloak, and he turned, and he said to this man, who was always called by my mother Mr. Pimplehuber, well, Pimplehuber, if I had known during the First World War that you were going to become this, I would have shot you in the trenches. Walked out. Anyway, they got away with it. They got away with all of it. They never got caught. But that doesn't make it any less traumatic. And my father too, I mean, he was incredibly... He had a gift that was so useful to MI5 or MI6 or whoever it was, you know. He could speak, he was a linguist, a philologist, and he could speak any European language without an accent. So he was taken over in an aeroplane, dropped behind the lines, had to hide his parachute, change his clothes, and wherever he was, you know, Poland, Yugoslavia, Germany, Russia, whatever, no, not Russia, I can't remember everything. He could do it. And it was only when I read, did you ever read the Gita Sareni book, In Search of Albert Speer, is it? Yeah. And it was when I read that, my father was still alive, and I suddenly realized, my God, what he saw. You know, he actually saw things like mass graves with arms and legs waving. You know, that's what was going on. And my father was there, and he saw it. He saw the slave labour. He saw all those things that Gita Sareni describes so brilliantly. And then my uncle Alex, who was fighting with Tito in the partisans in Yugoslavia, said to my father, when you go through Vienna, because they always, it was like the third man really, you know, they all had to go through Vienna to get back to Blighty. When you get to Vienna, would you look up my parents and my sister, please, and see if they're all right and give them my love? So my father said, yes, of course I will. And so he did. He went, they were living, and this helped them a lot, actually. I think it protected them a bit. They were at the Hungarian Institute, because my grandmother was Hungarian. And she was blonde. She was one of those beautiful blonde Jewish girls. You know, you see them now at Tel Aviv airport with with Uzis. Or you did. I don't know what's happening now. And that's where I get my hair from, of course. The door was opened by this absolute raving beauty, and it was Ava. And my poor father was gone. That was it. He was in love. And I don't think she ever really fell in love with him. I think he looked nice and clean and well fed, and he was English, and she was very pro-English. They used to listen to the BBC radio, under pillows and things. And she knew, everybody knew that the English were fighting this, poor English and the poor Russians really, were fighting this lone battle against Nazism. And so they got together. And then they got married and they had me. And then it was very difficult for both of them. My mother and her mother had been raped by a Russian soldier when the Russians came into Vienna. I guess it's very hard to try to get your head around these things, but I think that was really ghastly. And then she shot him. That's even more amazing. She had a gun and she shot him, the bastard. And so they were both really traumatized. And then I was born. I'm banging on.
Quite a different life in the next generation than the previous one. Or rather, tell us a little bit about that period, though, when right as you were. How did you come to be discovered, actually? And how
I went to a party with my soon-to-be husband, John Dunbar, who was wonderful and still is wonderful. He was a sort of hipster cat, actually, and said things like dig and man. I loved him. I went to this party with John, and we went because John was a friend of Peter Asher, who was in Peter and Gordon. Do you remember them? Yes. And the Beatles were there, and the Rolling Stones were there, and all this stuff was there. And, people, they were stuff, they were people at that point. And I think I looked very different. I wasn't really made up, I wasn't dressed up, I was just, I had jeans on and a shirt belonging to John's sisters, but I was very pretty. So it didn't matter. And I caused quite a sensation, which I didn't really notice much. But the Rolling Stones manager, who was delighted in the name of Andrew Luke Oldham, asked John, they didn't ask me, in those days women didn't have a mind. He asked John, can she sing? And John said, oh, I don't know, I think she can. Marianne, can you sing? Yeah. And so Andrew Oldham wanted to make a record, and I made a record. And that was As Tears Go By. And that was rather wonderful. I thought that was a beautiful song. I still sing it, actually. I haven't got tired of it. There was a little time where I got a bit sick of it. But there are some songs I really don't get sick of. I don't get sick of broken English, although I do call it Broken Biscuits. I don't get sick of the Ballad of Lucy Jordan. And I don't get sick of As Tears Go By. And the other ones I really do have to change around,
And so, once you recorded that song and people started to pay attention, what was that period like for you?
Well, they didn't at first. At first I just went back to school, played it to my mum, my mother, I should say. We didn't say mum those days. And her friends, and they thought nothing of it. They thought it was absolute crap. They didn't say that. They didn't think much of it. And so I thought nothing would ever happen. And it took ages, you know, we did it in spring, and it wasn't till October that it started to go. And then suddenly my life changed. And I had to do television shows, and Ready, Steady, Go, Thank Your Lucky Stars, Top of the Pops, all that stuff. Really work, actually. And then I had to go on tour for very little money, I'm afraid. With a guitarist I went. It was in a group of rock bands like the Hollies, Freddie and the Dreamers, oh God, you know, and so on and so forth. The Hollies were great, actually, they were my favourites. In a bus, on a tour, well, it wasn't a bus like they have now, it was like a coach, and you got into it, and off you went to Bradford, you know. And it was very weird, and I didn't really believe it was happening or serious. I thought I would be back at school in a second, you know. So I spent my time reading Jane Austen and Keats and Milton and my A-level books, you know, because I thought that's what would happen. And I was very laughed at for that, but I didn't care. What do they know? And but they were very nice. It was the first time I'd ever met actual working class boys, and I thought they were really nice, much nicer than the kind of boys I'd met before, apart from John. And so I did that tour. Then I did a tour with, and this is very, very exciting, Roy Orbison and the Candymen. I thought Roy Orbison was fantastic. It was just after Claudette had been killed in a motorbike accident, which was very tragic, so he was kind of delicate, really, but such a gentleman, really. The Candymen were weird. They were all sort of East Texas boys, you know. And it was during that tour that John proposed to me and I accepted, because I was pregnant, actually. And in 1964, you didn't have babies without getting married. It was just not done at all. And so John and I got engaged, and one of the Candymen went nuts because he believed that I don't know what he thought. Well, she's getting married, and that means I can never fuck her. And indeed, I never did fuck him. Next question. Am I giving you a clue?
Yes. Let's talk about Nick a little bit, if that's all right. Just a little bit.
Oh yeah, all right.
So you were already close with the rest of the band by then.
I was what?
You were close with the band, with everyone else in the band, with Keith as well?
Well, I really, yeah, I mean, I like them all. I didn't like Bill much, I'm afraid. But I very much like Charlie and Shirley. I loved Keith. And I was with Mick, yeah, Mick was very good to me, very good to me.
And you were together for, I think, what, 6 years?
No.
4 years?
4. Very quick.
Would you like to talk a little bit about that time and what that was like for you?
Well, it was in some ways it was fantastic, of course. You know, there was money, and I got a beautiful house in Cheney Walk, which a friend of mine, David Milanarik, decorated for me. It was beautiful. And I had fancy friends like Christopher Gibbs and Robert Fraser, and I was very grand indeed. But it wasn't, there was something wrong really. It wasn't the life I had been brought up for at all. And I didn't know, I don't think I even liked all the money. I didn't like it. It made me feel funny. It made me feel weird. And it wasn't mine, you know. I could spend it, and I did. and Mick was very, very kind to Nicholas, my son. Nicholas liked him very much when he was a little boy. But I kind of knew I didn't belong there at all, somehow. Although I was very useful, because, you know, when you're with somebody and you sleep in the same bed and you love them and they love you, in a funny way, there's a sort of mind meld. And Mick had access to my mind, even to my dreams, I think. And I read a lot. I always read a lot. And I would tell him what I was reading, and it would inspire him. It would inspire his songs. Like, I was reading The Master and Margarita, and I gave it to him to read, and out of that he wrote Sympathy for the Devil. So I'm quite proud of that.
And together you co-wrote Sister Morphine.
Well, yeah.
Can you tell us about that process?
Mick had this beautiful tune hanging around. He was playing it around the house for about 6 months, no words. And in the end, I just thought, I said, look, I'm so tired of hearing this beautiful tune with no words. Do you mind if I write the words? And he said, no, go ahead. So I wrote this story about a man who's been in a terrible accident and is in hospital and he's dying. And he's begging for morphine. I'd never taken morphine. I just thought it was a beautiful word. And that was Sister Morphine. Yeah.
You mentioned how much you've been reading at the time.
Yeah.
And that you left school and you were doing more and more reading on your own, kind of an autodidact.
Well, I am an autodidact, but I got some help, you know. I mean, pretty soon, even before I got married to John, I was one of the lucky few who were allowed up to where God was staying in the Savoy, and God was Bob Dylan. And up there with me was Allen Ginsberg, Terry Southern, a lot of other loons, you know. And that was when I met Alan. Well, I don't know if it was when I met Alan. I met Alan on my honeymoon with John in at the Beat Hotel. But this is when I got close to Alan. And Alan was a big influence on me and on my reading. And later, when I was clean and sober and sort of getting along very well, I went down. He invited me to teach at Naropa, which was in Boulder, Colorado, and it was the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics. And Alan knew that I felt bad and less than because I hadn't gone to university, and I felt not good enough. And he made me, or had made, a badge that said, Marianne Faithfull, Professor of Poetics, Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics. and that's my feeling of being low and uneducated disappeared. And I did that for 3 years. But what I did was go to a lot of Alan's lectures. He was a wonderful teacher. And it was also a place for meditation. And I learned Tibetan meditation, and that has been a great help to me. But, you know, he taught courses on William Blake, on, God, I I've forgotten his name, the guy who wrote Leaves of Grass. Walt Whitman, yeah. Which actually I hope I can join the library because I never really read it.
I'm sure we can take care of that right now.
And I really must. So in my dreams, when I see Alan, I can say, look, when I've done it, I did it. But he would read it out, and it was fantastic. And lots of people taught there. Burroughs was there, Corso, Anne Waldman. It was wonderful. It was a wonderful experience. And I, my God, was teaching lyric writing. And some of my students did very well. Incredible.
One of the things that I was looking forward to discussing is your voice.
My voice.
Because your voice is not the voice that it was in 1964.
It sure isn't.
Just like Leonard Cohen's or Bob Dylan's that have changed over the years. How do you approach the songs you used to do? What do you think of your voice now? And
I got the voice I wanted. I hated my voice in 1964. I sounded like a stupid little girl, which is what I was. A nice, stupid little girl. Not that stupid, but sort of, you know, and knew nothing. And I piped away like a little bird. And I didn't like it. I couldn't say with that voice the things I would have liked to say. It wasn't what I wanted. Anyway, so I went about changing it in a rather radical way. I took a lot of drugs, and I drank a lot, and I smoked a lot, and my voice changed, yes.
does that, I assume because you do a lot of covers, you do songs of Bob Dylan, James Taylor, Phil Ochs, Cat
Well, I
Stevens.
did.
Well, even now some of these...
I still do when I do get writing blocks, which are not fun at all, as everybody who writes knows. And when I do that, I can't write, so I have to do covers. But I've become very good at it.
And how do you think that has changed? Because you've done covers going back to Rich Kid Blues in '71.
Yeah. And funnily enough, on the next tour, which starts on, oh my God, on the 3rd of October in Dijon, I'm going to sing It's All Over Now, Baby Blue from Rich Kid Blues. I used to hate Rich Kid Blues because of bad memories, because I was on smack, I was homeless, it was terrible. But actually, it's not a bad record. And
just if I may say, this is an album that was recorded in '71 and not released until '86.
Well, I would,
maybe not even in the US ever.
I didn't want it released. I never wanted anyone to hear it at all. But anyway, it was released, nothing to do with me, they didn't ask me. And on that record is It's All Over Now, Baby Blue. So what I'm doing at the moment, I'm going over all my lyrics, and I can tell you, you probably all think you know the lyrics of It's All Over Now, Baby Blue. I bet you do. Leave your stepping stones behind you, someone calls for you. Forget the dead you've left, they will not follow you. But you don't. It's more complicated than you can imagine. It's very difficult. So I hope I get it right.
You just mentioned a bit about this period that included drug abuse and even homelessness. What you said, I've read that you sought anonymity at that time, even though you were in London.
Well, I didn't say I think I'll live on the street, shoot smack, and seek anonymity. I ran away. You know, I ran as far as I could from Mick, and it was a horrible thing to do. You know, to leave poor Mick in his beautiful house with all his money and basically say, I would rather live on the street and shoot smack and have no money and have nothing than be with you. That's not very nice way to behave.
So how were you able to then get out of that hole at that time?
With help.
What kind of help did you get?
Well, I met this doctor who's still alive and still working, called Dr. Willis. He was, I actually, at the time in England, they don't do it anymore, they should, because it really helped people. You could become a registered drug addict, and I did. And so instead of having to score all the time, I went every morning to Dr. Willis's surgery with millions of other junkies, and, well, not millions, but quite a lot. And I was given so much a day. And that took away a lot of stress and pressure and danger, I think, really. And then eventually, and Dr. Willis got it, you know, he said, and I think he was right, he said, I was using heroin as a substitute for love. Which is weird, because it's not like nobody loved me, but it was as if I wanted, I don't know what, you know, but I think he was right. Anyway, I went into hospital in Bexley Heath under Dr. Willis into a National Health Hospital, free, and I did the longest coming off drugs known to man. It took 8 months. I would come off and then I would get the horrors and go back on again. But I did get off in the end, and I left the hospital. They were very good to me. It was really a frightening place, actually. But I could handle it when I was on smack, but once I was off, I had to leave. And I had met somebody very, very nice called Oliver Musker, who took me and looked after me, and we were in love, and we were together quite a long time. And we went to India together, and he's still a great friend of mine, and he lives in India now. And he married a lovely Indian girl called Kitten. And yeah, he was great. But again, you know, I knew I would never be able to fit into his life. He was very upper class, he was old Etonian, very social. He was really social, and I'm really not. I'm sort of antisocial. I've got some very good friends I love, who I trust, but I can't, I'm not a goer out at lots of parties kind of person. I can't bear them. And so I don't, you know. And then, I don't know what happened, I can't remember.
That was when you recorded Broken English, was it? The beginning of that experience?
It was after I left Oliver. Yes. Because I was dying to go back to work. Oliver wanted to marry me, and he wanted me to, they all wanted to marry me and have more children. And I'm somebody, there may be other women here too, who hated childbirth. I loathed it. And I said to myself, I will never do this again. And I never did.
In more recent years, you've been collaborating with young musicians. Well, not so young.
They were young when I collaborated.
People
They're
like
not so young now. Like Damon Albarn, Nick Cave, Beck, Billy Corgan, Dave Stewart. It was
PJ Harvey.
Jarvis Cocker. Fabulous. It was a wonderful record. It was my only, what I call my electronic record. And it really worked, actually. It was fun. But I actually prefer analogue. Real music in real time, played in a real studio, no overdubs, one mic, just done proper, you know.
So in that sense, you're kind of critical of how popular music has evolved from 1960s.
It's not my scene.
No.
No.
I've heard you say some funny things about the most popular stars these days.
You have?
I'm trying
Probably
to
things that should not be repeated.
Okay. Some comments on Miley Cyrus and other people.
Oh, for God's sake. Yeah, I mean, you know who has just written a great book, by the way, which you've got to have when it comes out? Grace, our Grace Jones, has written a cracker in which she puts down all of them. You know, Britney, Miley, Lady Gaga, Madonna, everyone. And Grace can really do that really well, you know, much better than me. And you know, I mean, I've known Grace for years. She's a sweet Jamaican girl, but she's got it. She can really, if she wants to really slag someone off, she knows how. She's done the job.
So then, what are you listening to these days?
Me?
Yes, you.
What I always listen to. I listen to jazz, I listen to Coltrane, Miles Davis, Cannonball Adderley, well, jazz in general, all sorts of things. A lot of classical music. I love 17th century music, particularly. I love Mozart, Beethoven, Bach. God, endless, you know. And I listen to Nick Cave, and I listen to Polly, and I listen to Damon Albarn. I'm very interested in what he's up to. And I listen to Jarvis. I listen to people I know, actually. And I love folk music too. I really do. I found a song the other day called Katie Cruel, and I really would like to record that.
That is actually my last question is, what is your next recording going to be?
I don't have to think about that yet. You know.
You're the tour.
I've got a whole year of touring ahead of me. But the time will come, you know, and slowly I wait for things to happen, and then I write about them. I don't plan out things like that, you know. And things do happen. The last record it's like a spell. The person I love most in the world had a liver transplant, and of course it was a matter of life and death. And I made Give My Love to London as a spell, and it worked, and he's fine, and everything's okay.
I'm sure some of you have questions as well. Before we get to that, when the books that will be on sale, we'll bring them up here where Marianne can sign them at this table, just so you know that. Who has a question?
I did have voice and piano lessons and theory of music lessons and dance lessons and elocution lessons. My mother trained me up, you know. And I had a very, very good singing teacher and music teacher at the convent, Sister Benignus, her name was. And I sang in the choir. That's always the classic.
So when you
way
asked
in.
if you could sing, you really could sing. You really had some background.
Oh yeah, yeah. I can read music. Orfeo.
Monteverdi.
Yeah, and Gluck, but that's a bit later.
That's 18th century.
Yeah, and just songs, you know.
Yeah. There's a lot of great music there.
Really beautiful music. I've just found out that Anne Boleyn's songbook has been found after 500 years. And it's her songbook before she met Henry VIII. You know? So it's very interesting. What a lady, what an incredibly interesting woman. And the mother of my great heroine, of course, Elizabeth I. Yes. About Keith?
Yes.
Well, he's just fantastic. He has integrity. He's not a womanizer. He loves, you know, he's a one woman man. I like that. and he lives for his music. And he's very good. And he's an autodidact. He reads all the time. Really heavy books, actually. Things I couldn't get through, like the rise and fall of the Roman Empire.
I think he said he wanted to read that so he could learn more about longevity.
Oh, really?
Yes, yeah, because the
Well,
stones,
he's
you
not
know, for
doing
50
badly,
years.
is he?
No.
No. And there are some very funny things on the internet where, they used to compare Keith to a cockroach and say everything will be dead except Keith Richards and the cockroach. And now that's changed. They're beginning to get a bit more respect. And there's a lovely thing that says, what kind of world are we going to leave for Keith Richards? What indeed. I love poetry. I picked up all this at school, and I never lost it. I don't know what to say. I think my songs are quite poetic, but I do write for my own poetry, but it's mine. I'm never going to show it to anybody. Well, I was brought up on that music, It's so odd, the stuff my parents brought from Vienna to England that didn't get broken. They brought some beautiful, my mother brought her china, and she also brought her 78th, which was Marlene Dietrich, of course, and Kurt Weill and Brecht. So I heard it as a baby. I was listening to it. And then my friend Hal Wilner made a record of the music of Kurt Weill called Lost in the Stars, and I sang the Ballad of the Soldier's Wife. And that kind of got me hooked on singing it. I didn't know I could sing Kurt Weill. And in fact, I had plenty of very impertinent journalists say to me, "What makes you think you can sing Kurt Weill?" And of course, it's in my blood. The interesting thing I know about Kurt Weill, I find very interesting, is that he doesn't use the Western scale. He uses the scale from the temple, which I think is very, very interesting. And that is why I can sing Kurt Weill. That's my blood.
Thank you very much for joining us.
It was a pleasure.